On the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us right now, you hear him every morning from 9 to noon on 99.3 Talk FM, and he's gracious enough to be on our show this afternoon. Tim Brando, how you doing, Timmy? Did he go away? Oh, yep. Oh, no. Speaking of being raised by apes, let's... Did he go away? Oh, he's still there. See, I knew it. Speaking of needing to be raised by apes,
there he is.
Junior, I'm turning you back over to the zoo, I promise you. Mr. Brando, how are you?
Good, Bryan. How are you?
Doing very well. Anybody on your list that you think probably would have been better off being raised by apes?
Let's see. How many pundits are either in Washington or talking about Washington?
Good point. You know, I just thought
if you're in Washington or you're talking about Washington,
picking fleas off
what side of the aisle you're on.
Yep.
I would suggest any of those would qualify.
Picking fleas off their underarms and eating them. That probably would be more productive, yes.
Hey, if nothing else, I knew very early on in my life, stay the hell away from the people in the news.
Amen.
Now, sadly, the same thing's beginning to happen in sports, which is bothering me, but that's another story for another day.
Oh, man, no kidding. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, because this coming Wednesday, it will be 1 year that we've been doing this show, and you were gracious enough to come on the show our very first day then, and the NFL preseason schedule is screwing up my life this week. So we were just really glad to get you, and I got Brad Sham to come on today as well, and so I just want to thank you for being part of that again and helping us to celebrate, even though we're going to make it a week-long celebration now.
Well, you should. You should. It's your show, and if you want it to last a week, let it last a week.
I'm all for that.
I would.
I'm all for that.
Remember, this is we may live in a democracy, but your show is a dictatorship.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to put that up
as a... You can make it last as long as you want to last, and I'm glad that you've been on for a year, and it's, hey, that's like making another team photo for a major league team, you know?
I think you're right. You're right. I like that. All right, you're getting ready for college football, and I'll ask you about that in just a minute. But first of all, you are doing the New Orleans Saints preseason games on TV right now, correct?
Right.
How are they handling all this chaos of not having Sean Payton and getting ready to deal with not having Vitt and, all the things that are going on around there?
Amazingly well, and I guess to some extent you have to look at the level of professionalism and the regiment that's put in the National Football League today with all the teams. All of them basically operate in a similar fashion, but the people involved are not always the same. Maybe there's a discipline to what they do, but that isn't to say that everybody's going to exercise the same discipline. In New Orleans, it seems that's the case. And I gather that the reason behind that is because number 9 is, Breeze is a little bit like Sean Payton in pads, and everybody marches to the beat of his drum from an offensive standpoint. It appears that the decisions that have been made by Mickey Loomis, first to install Joe Vitt as the interim, and now Aaron Cromer, the offensive line coach, as the interim for the first few weeks of the season, seems to be met positively. Aaron's been with the staff for about 6 years, and I think it was a lot of people, a lot of guys in the position of Mickey Loomis, the GM, would have possibly turned to Steve Spagnuolo because he's been a head coach before. But I think understanding the locker room and the people that make up this team, that by and large the veterans that have been there since 2006, post-Katrina, when Sean Payton came in, those are the leaders on the team, whether it's Will Smith as a defensive lineman, Jonathan Vilma before he was suspended. Now, to some extent, I think probably the leaders on defense would be Harper and Malcolm Jenkins to some extent, along with Will Smith. They get it. They understand what the team's foundation is and the way they need to play. Spagnuolo's installing a new defensive system, and everyone seems to be adhering to it as well as they possibly can. But the pulse of this team is really Drew Brees and the way Drew Brees acts as a coach on the field. And And I think that the staff understands that. They play to that. Drew is very comfortable with Pete Carmichael calling plays. And with all those different responsibilities, I think having the offensive line coach, Aaron Cromer, sort of oversee the big picture decisions and when to throw the red flag and that kind of thing, it seems to be being met very well. Very well. I don't see any way the New Orleans Saints are not competing for the division, at worst a wild card team, and with a chance of getting to the Super Bowl in New Orleans this year. And that's without Sean Payton for the whole year. Bottom line is they just got to keep Drew Brees healthy. Yeah, and I think other guys need to be healthy from an offensive standpoint too. I don't think that they could afford to lose from an offensive standpoint too many of those great receivers. Without a doubt, Lance Moore has been a bit injury plagued. Marcus Colston, the same thing. He missed about 6 games last year. I think they need to keep those guys as healthy as possible, as well as Drew, and get that consistency in their running game back. The combination, and it's a committee of Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles, and Mark Ingram. Those guys, if they can be as effective as they were a year ago, running downhill with the football, and just improve some defensively. You know, they were -3 in turnover ratio last year. That's not good. Nowhere close to where they were when they led the division in turnover ratio the year they won the Super Bowl. I think they've got to improve in that area and get better play at the linebacking position. That's a little bit of a question mark now. They've lost Hawthorne, they've lost Chamberlain, and Curtis Lofton is a little nicked up himself, and they've gone out and gotten Baron Roode, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneer, as a linebacker. They've got to try to get themselves as healthy as possible at linebacker. But by and large, I think they're going to be improved on defense, and I don't see the offense getting any worse. And you could argue that their one bad defensive call against Vernon Davis away from the Super Bowl last year, I submit that if they had beaten the 49ers, they would have absolutely owned the Giants in that rematch in the Superdome. They absolutely killed them in the regular season. That would have been a bad matchup for the Giants. I think the Giants know that.
All right, talking college football now, I saw a comment today on Twitter. The Big 12 Commissioner, Bob Bowlesby, says, we don't want the SEC to win another national championship. Is this basically going to be the theme of the year, that everybody else in the country is going to have to stop the dominance of the Southeastern Conference at all costs? We've got to stop the enemy now while we can, or is that even possible? Well, I like the gamesmanship on Bob's part. You know, since coming over as a former AD and taking the reins from Chuck Ninus, I think he's got his talking points in order. You know, it's his job to champion the Big 12, and they clearly are the league that during the BCS era has challenged the SEC the most. I kind of like it. I love it when the suits start drawing lines in the sand. I think that's a fun thing. I think it's good. But, yeah, there is a definite bandwagon backlash against the SEC. I'm spending a lot of time on my show talking about it, and whenever you hear me bring this subject up about most deserving versus best team, that is a lightning rod statement to raise the ire of the SEC, because last year, I don't think there's any question, Alabama played for the national championship because the perception was they were the best team. Mm-hmm. But at the same time that Alabama was considered the best team, the perception was Oklahoma State was the most deserving team. So last year, best won out over most deserving. What if the SEC puts itself in that same position again this year, in that team that's most deserving, instead of having one loss like Oklahoma State does or did last year? What if that undefeated team is what if that most deserving team is undefeated? And that best team argument is being made by a team in the SEC that has one loss. See, it's my contention that all the great teams in the SEC are going to lose a game, at least one, in the league. And what if multiple teams out of the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 are undefeated? Do you automatically just plug them in because they're undefeated? Or do you say, well, look, if they had played in the mighty SEC and gone in a schedule where you had to play Arkansas, Alabama,
or LSU Alabama or Alabama Arkansas, any combination thereof, would they have come out of there undefeated? I would submit that I think that the SEC would not get the benefit of the doubt if, in fact, the argument is working and most deserved is undefeated versus with one loss. I mean, if Oklahoma had Oklahoma State's record last year, I think Oklahoma would have played in that game over Alabama, don't you?
Wow, yeah, probably so.
Oklahoma State doesn't carry the same brand name or cachet that Oklahoma does. So without a doubt, if the argument is one of those teams out of either the ACC, Pac-12, or Big 12, I don't think a Big Ten, well, maybe Wisconsin out of the Big Ten would fall into this category as well. If any one of those teams are undefeated and the SEC has everyone with at least a loss, I think they're going to get shut out. I do.
I think that there's definitely the idea. I sound like a conspiracy theorist when I say this, but like you said, if all things are equal, I don't think there's going to be any sentiment to put two SEC teams in the championship game.
No, and I alienate all the Alabama people when I say it, but I don't care. The facts are what they are. Had Alabama not played LSU, then we wouldn't be talking about a Final Four and a playoff format in 2 years.
No, I totally agree.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back, and you know, a lot of Alabama fans feel I'm being unjust to them by suggesting it. Like they can't handle the truth. I mean, the facts are what they are. Alabama lost at home to LSU, and yet got to play them again in the bowl game. Had Oklahoma State not lost to Iowa State, then they would have been in that game, and I think a lot of people would have preferred seeing that game over the Alabama LSU rematch. But Oklahoma State didn't take care of their business either. I never said that Alabama didn't deserve to play the game. I thought they did. They certainly proved that by not just winning, but manhandling LSU. But without that game being played, we wouldn't have seen an overnight meeting the next day among the conference commissioners and this incredible path towards a Final Four format and changed. But we wouldn't have seen it.
No.
Not this soon. We might have seen it down the road, but I don't think we would have seen it 2 years from now.
Well, you know, the SEC is Darth Vader right now. You got to stamp them out while you can, you know? I mean, there's no question about that. Are you going to pick a couple of teams to be in the championship, or do you withhold?
No, I've already done that, Bryan. I've got LSU playing USC. I think LSU, even with a loss, is going to be in a position. See, you can make a good case that everybody's going to lose this year. Scheduling-wise, Oklahoma would probably be your best bet out of the Big 12 to go undefeated. I think scheduling-wise, USC maybe out in the Pac-12 would be in an advantageous position too, even though they don't have. They clearly don't have as many tough teams on their schedule as Oklahoma does. But I think LSU with one loss, I don't see more than one other team being undefeated. I think USC has the best chance of going undefeated, so I'm going with them. But it could be Oklahoma too, one of those two teams. And then I've got the LSU-Alabama winner, and this year the game's in Baton Rouge. I'm going with LSU. So those are my two teams in the national championship right now: USC and LSU. And if it's not SC, I think it'll be Oklahoma.
Well, tee it up. It's time to start playing some games.
You bet.
I'm ready. Hey, Timmy, thank you very much for coming on with us again. We love it, and we love to listen to your show from 9 to noon on 99.3 Talk FM, and wish you a great fall football season, okay?
You got it, Bryan. And by the way, as we like to say on our show, we baked you a birthday cake. If you get a tummy ache and you moan and whine and grow, don't forget we told you so. Happy birthday. You're a year old.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Tim Brando on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM. All right, we're going to take a time out. We'll come back with Craig. We'll talk a little Rangers, a little Cowboys, and rehash a little bit about what Tim had to say about his picks for the national championship when we return.